Okay, so we're on Sanhedrin Daf Ayin Daled Amud Beis, and we're up to Esther Farhesia Havi.
Sanhedrin.
Okay, so Ayin Daled Amud Beis, and we started the sugya of Esther Farhesia Havi. Okay, then
It goes sort of like with parallel to the Gemara in like Subis, right?
Yes, very much depend on the Gemara Ksubis. Tosas, as we'll see, Tosas is going to make a big deal about the sugya in Ksubis. Okay, then.
What daf is it again? Ayin Daled, you said?
Ayin Daled Amud Beis, 74b.
Okay, I got it. Okay.
And I'll just organize the electricity here so that this thing doesn't die on me. I know that, John, you have to leave early today, right?
Mm.
So usually our shir lasts for about 45 minutes, but
Okay.
I have to apologize. The daf today, which I give before this, is very complicated. It's the Agadah. I find the Agadah to be more complicated than the regular, Shas Gemaras. Very, very complicated. Yeah. And another reason why we have to today will be a half hour instead of 45 minutes is because John has to go. So I didn't want John to miss too much of this. In any event, the Gemara is dealing with the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem here on Daf Ayin Daled Amud Beis. And the Gemara establishes that the following three principles apply with regard to Kiddush Hashem. The first principle is the Gimel Averos Chamuros, and for that you have to give up your life under all circumstances, rather than violate Gilui Arayos, Shvichas Dam, Avodah Zarah. And we went through all the Yalfusas on Daf Ayin Daled Amud Aleph. We're not going to go over that now. So there's no distinction between Farhesia, Tzina, whether it's Shas Hashmad or Shalom Shas Hashmad. It's an absolute rule. You have to give up your life. That's Yehareg Val Yavar in the Gimel Averos Chamuros. Then we move over to the next category, which is Shara Averos Befarhesia. And there, the halacha is V'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. B'toch b'nei Yisrael means, the Gemara derives toch with a Gzeira Shavah. It means Asar mi-Yisrael. So in the presence of Asar mi-Yisrael, if a guy would force you to violate any of the mitzvahs, meaning the other 610, you would have to give up your life b'farhesia rather than apply the principle of v'chai b'hem. And we had a long discussion about how that works. Then we have a third halacha, and that's called Shas Hashmad, when there's religious persecution against the Jewish people, and then you have to give up your life. The Gemara establishes even for Arkas of the Masani, which is the shoelace on, or perhaps the color of your shoelace on your shoes. And here we have Machlokes, Rashi, and other Rishonim as to whether or not there's a mitzvah to wear a certain kind of a shoe, or perhaps it's just a minhag, and even on a minhag, b'shas hashmad, you'd have to give up your life. The Gemara asks the following question: what about Esther? Esther, according to one opinion in Chazal, on the pasuk Vayikra lo lebas al tikri lebas el lebayis, was married to Mordechai, and therefore the assumption is that before we see the Gemara in Ksubis, that she would have to give up her life rather than have a relationship with Achashverosh. But the strange thing that Tosas points out, Divra Maskel Esther Farhesia Tema Dahavi Lakshuye Arayos Havi. How could Esther agree to have a relationship with Achashverosh? That would be Gilui Arayos. In so far as she was married to Mordechai, Tosas does not at this point differentiate between a guy and a Jew, meaning whether this married woman would have a relationship with a guy or with a Jew. In both cases, the halacha would require that she give up her life rather than violate Gilui Arayos. And we know that according to some, when the Gemara asks Befar Hesya, this is according to almost all Rishonim, with the exception of the Balamor that we started yesterday, all the Rishonim assume, and that's what we see here in Tosas Kasha, that when the Gemara asks for Esther Far Hesya Havi, the very fact that the Gemara adds that description of Far Hesya, which Rashi explains that everybody knew, all the Jewish people knew, it was public knowledge that she was married to Mordechai and that now she was getting married to Achashverosh, that Far Hesya, insofar as the Gemara invokes the halacha of Far Hesya, applies only to Shara Veros. Why, asks Tosas, did the Gemara have to introduce Far Hesya? Drop the ball on Far Hesya. Omit Far Hesya. All you have to ask is for Esther Gilia Rayas Havi. If the Gemara is assuming that Esther was married to Mordechai, as we darshan from that pasuk, then she would be in violation of Gilia Rayos, even Bitsina. There's no reason. Again, Al Piemes, she was before Hesya. Everybody knew.
I have a question. According to the beginning of assumption of the Gemara, which is not the Maskana, but according to the beginning assumption, wouldn't it have made sense? Very simple thing. The issue with Esther was Niyuf, right? She was married to, so she would give Mordechai a get. There's no question that this was something she was doing for Klal Yisrael. She would give Mordechai a get, and according to this, and then that was the solution.
So you're asking, why didn't Mordechai just give her a get? That's your question.
Yeah. According to the Havamina.
Right. I would say the following, that at one point in time, Esther was taken to the Beis HaMalchus sort of against her will. Again, she could have resisted, but it would have cost her her life, because we know already from the previous queen what happens to you if you refuse the king. But be that as it may, there was no opportunity for Mordechai to give a get to his wife because she was already taken into the Beis HaMelech. Now, could he have sent it through a shliach? That's an issue, because the shliach has to be b'toras gittin v'kedushin. What does that mean? You can only send a shliach for a get. Like, for example, there was a shliach of Mordechai to Esther called Hasach, but he was not Jewish. He was Ma'isarise HaMelech. And Mordechai did not have the opportunity to send a get. But let's leave your question on the side, because we are a little bit pressed for time. We want to know the following. Why did the Gemara raise the question of Far Hesya with regard to Esther and seemingly omitting the Gilia Rayas? Gilia Rayas, as we said, one of the Gimel Averes Chamuris, doesn't require Befar Hesya. The requirement of Yehar Gal Yavar is absolute. It's unconditional, whether or not it was Befar Hesya or B'tzina. And by adding the word Befar Hesya, Tosas assumes that the Gemara is invoking the halach of Shara Veros, omitting the halach of Gilia Rayas. And why is that so? Again, we saw yesterday the Baal HaMa'or. He understood that the Gemara was talking about even Gilia Rayas itself. But all the other Rishonim assume that there's no problem of Gilia Rayas. Now, let's keep in mind that the Gemara gives two answers to this question. As we've seen in the past, there's Abaye and Rav. Abaye's answer is Karka Olam, and Rav's answer is Hanos Asman Shining. According to the Baal HaMa'or, if we're dealing with Gilia Rayos, and that was the Gemara's question, then it comes out that Hanos Asmo Shiny is a matir on Gilia Rayos, and that's wild. This position of Baal HaMa'or is absolutely revolutionary. Before the Baal HaMa'or, every Risha went on record as saying that Gilia Rayos is absolute. Yehar Gal Yavar, there's no way, no how, under any condition whatsoever, that you would allow yourself to be involved in Gilia Rayos, even at the expense of your life. No motivation or no mitigating circumstance could permit a violation of Gilia Rayos. Comes along the Baal HaMa'or and he says, nay, that's not true. If you have Hanos Asmon Shiny, that would be Mater Gilia Rayos. How does that operate? So just to give you a sum, because Nassim, you weren't with us yesterday, and we'll go on today with something new as we go through the Tosfos in Yud Hashem. The Balamar sheet is apparently that V'chai Bohem and Gili Arayis are somehow on the same level. They're Shava b'Shava, they're Shkulim, Echad Keneged Hasheni. We don't know which is more important, the life of a Jew and his sustenance, or the violation of Gili Arayis. It's a stalemate, what the Israelis call Teku. And therefore, at this point, what's going to be the cause of Ashlishi Amachriya Beinayim? The mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. If the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem is the final determining factor, says the Baal Amar, Kiddush Hashem only applies when it's Lavuri al Das, when the purpose and the goal, the agenda of this person who's forcing you into this Maisa Vera is to get you to desecrate your religion. But if he's only interested in Anah, Achashverosh had no idea whatsoever that Esther was a Jewess, and therefore his interest was only Anah. Then there's no Kiddush Hashem. And that's where the Baal Amar introduces the possibility of being Matir Gili Arayos for the sake of a Chai Bohem if there's no Kiddush Hashem. Because the Baal Amar understood that it's not the Chumras Havera of Gili Arayos that prevents Yavar Val Yehorik for the Maisa to happen, but rather it is the Kiddush Hashem dimension. And the Kiddush Hashem is dependent and conditional on Lavuri al Das, does not apply in the case of Lanos Atzmo Kamacha. That's the Baal Amar from yesterday. However, we're studying now the Tosfos. Tosfos didn't know from this Baal Amar. He understood that the Gemara was focused totally on Shara Averos and not on Gili Arayos. And his proof is in the pudding, as we would say proverbially. Because what does it say here in the Gemara? It says that Esther was Farhesia. As soon as you hear the word Farhesia, in the context of Yehorik Val Yavar, you know you're talking about Shara Averos. If you're talking about Gili Arayos, you would not mention or utter the word Farhesia. And now Tosfos has a problem. Why did the Gemara skip over the more obvious objection to Esther, namely she was Gili Arayos? And Tosfos now has to come up with some explanation as to why the Gemara didn't ask from Gili Arayos. And here Tosfos analyzes the concept of Abaye called Karka Ol. And Tosfos presents in the name of the Rivam the following thesis: that as far as Gili Arayos is concerned, it was Milsa de Pshita. It was never a question in the Gemara's mind that Karka Olam would be a mitigating circumstance. The Torah doesn't allow you to actively violate Gili Arayos, even in the case of a Chai Ben for the sake of saving your life. But if you're not active and you're only passive, which is called Karka Olam, then it was a Dover Pashut that she, in this case Esther, does not have to give up her life for Gili Arayos. But the Gemara thought that that factor called Karka Olam would only be relevant if we're talking about Gili Arayos. But if we're talking about Shara Averos B'Farhesia, then the Gemara is of the opinion that it makes no difference whether she's active or passive, whether or not it's Kumbaseh or Karka Olam Shevi Altaseh. In both of those scenarios, the Gemara argues she would have had to give up her life, resist marrying Achashverosh because of Yehorik Val Yavar of Shara Averos B'Farhesia, not because of Gili Arayos. On the level of Gili Arayos, it was a Milsa de Pshita. The Gemara understood very well that Karka Olam is a mitigating circumstance, and she would violate Gili Arayos B'Shevi Altaseh in Karka Olam, even though she's only doing it to save her life, but she would be allowed to do that because it's Shevi Altas. And here's where the Rambam gets very upset. And Reb Chaim has a long discussion about the Rambam. The Rambam seems to assume that when it comes to Gili Arayos, there's no difference in the Avera itself between Kumbaseh and Shevi Altas. And Reb Chaim says that this is based on a Sugya Bava Kama, and the Gemara Bava Kama establishes that when it says in Parshas Achrimos, we read it last Shabbos, the Nichrisu, Parshas Kedoshim, V'nichrusu anafashas ha'osos. Why the lashon ha'osos? Lahashvos boel l'niva. Meaning the niveles has the same status as the boel. Even though the niveles is karka olam, nevertheless, she has the same participation and violation of Gili Arayis as the boel, despite the fact that the boel is the active agent and she is the passive agent. Because the Torah changes the status of the Isha Niveles, in a certain sense, upgrades it to the status of equal to the boel, who is kumvaseh, and therefore, as far as the Chumras Havera is concerned, argues the Rambam, there's no difference between kumvaseh and karka olam. An isha is equal to a man with regard to the violation of Gili Arayis. So that's the Shitas HaRambam. However, the Rivam is of the opinion that in the case of karka olam, the halacha would be that she does not have to give up her life, even in the case of Gili Arayis. And the issue is, how does the Rivam understand the difference between kumvaseh and karka olam in the case of Gili Arayis, when the Torah clearly equates the boel and the niveles? They are both considered as active agents in the act of Arayos. That's the question that we have to answer in the Rivam. So let's just read the Rivam inside first. Ukmo chen kasha bereish ksubis. The famous Gemara of Tiboil lehegmen tchila. You have it?
You're reading in the middle of Tosfos, right?
It's line 4. We can start from the first 3 lines again if you like.
Well,
Right?
maybe in the wrong
Ukmo
place.
chen kasha.
Oh, I see it. Okay. I'm looking kasha bereish ksubis. I see it. Okay.
Excellent. The Omar, the Ikat Snuas, the Masri Nafshayat. That the reason why we had to set up a first marriage of a Basula on Or Liyom Aravi is because otherwise the Hegmon is going to come and she's a Tznuah and she's going to give up her life rather than have a Be'ilo with the Hegmon. And she's an Aramurasa. Uparach religious Ludona Shari. Why do you have this problem? Why not just teach the girls that they have to give, they don't give up their lives because Ones is mutter. So the Gemara says, Parech v'lidrosh lahu di Ones shari. Tosa says the following, Umay kusha. What kind of question is the Gemara asking? Shaper after the Mosin Afshai Mishum Gili Arayis. In a case of a Hegmon, and she's a Nara Murasa, if she has beer with the Hegmon, that's Gili Arayis. And how are you going to teach them that shari, that it's mutter? It's not mutter at all, because Gili Arayis is one of the big 3. And the reason why Tosas injects that kasha here is because Tosas is going to make an equation between our Gemara that assumes that in a case of karka olam, there's no yeharg val yavrin Gili Arayis, and that's going to explain Esther. And that's going to explain why Lidrish Ludona Shari, because she's going to be Karka Olam. Tiretz Rabbeinu Tam, then Chayovim Misal Bilas Akum. Rabbeinu Tam invokes the principle of Zirmas, Susim, Zirmasam, a pasuk in Yechezkel. Now, the simple pshat in that pasuk before Rabbeinu Tam, on a halachic sense, would be that the guy doesn't have yuchsin. So let's say, for example, a guy would have a relationship with a Jewish woman, chas v'chalila. The child from such a relationship would not be related to her non-Jewish father. There's no yufsin. However, Rabbeinu Tam takes it a step further, and he understands that zirmas susim zirmasom is an equation between be'ilas nachri and be'ilas behema. Sus is a behema. And we have a principle, which is in a Gemara Masechet Sota, called Eins Nus Lebehema. So if a woman violates what's called sodomy in fancy English, and she had a relationship with an animal, she could still maintain her relation with her husband. And the principle of Sota, which is called Echel Boel and Echel Baal, does not apply to a relationship that she had with an animal. And Rabbeinu Tam equates a relationship that she has with a guy who's a human being, flesh and blood, with an intellect, is equal to a relationship that she had with a behema, at least as far as the halacha of Gili Arayis is concerned. So, for example, according to Rabbeinu Tam, if a married Jewish woman were to have a relation with a guy, she would not be put to death, even though the violation of Harayos generates a chiyuv misa. It's a capital crime that condemns you to death. That would not apply if a married woman had a relation with a guy, because zirmas susim zurmasim, and the relation with a guy is different, and it doesn't fall under the category of Gili Arayos. So Rabbeinu Tam is admitting that Esther was married to Mordechai. He's admitting, therefore, that as a married woman, if she would have a relationship, an adulterous relationship, that would be a capital crime. But the chiddush of Rabbeinu Tam is, Bamedvar Mamurim, when do we say that her relationship with another man out of marriage is Gili Arayos? That's only with a Jewish man. But if she has a relation with a non-Jewish man, that's like a relation with a behema, and it doesn't constitute Gili Arayos. And therefore, she does not have to give up her life for the sake of having a relationship with a guy. The Gemara never asked the question, Esther Gili Arayos Havi. The Gemara understood, says Rabbeinu Tam very well from the get-go, that a relationship with Achashverosh would not qualify, would not be categorized as Gili Arayos because of Zirmas Susim Zirmasam. But the Gemara says that for any woman, even if she's not married, to have a relationship with a guy, that certainly comes under Shara Veros. And the Gemara says, therefore, Esther was violating Shara Veros in order to save her life. Why, says the Gemara? After all, it was Befar Hesia. As Rashi says, everybody knew about it. And therefore, Shara Veros Befar Hesia is Yehorg Val Yavor, even though it's not Gili Arayos. So again, Rabbeinu Tam is explaining why the Gemara never raised the objection to Esther Gili Arayos, but on the same token, the Gemara did objection because of Farhesi of Shara Veros, meaning Esther with Achashverosh is not Gili Arayos. The Gemara never could have objected because of Gili Arayos, because Zir Masusim Zumasam, but the Gemara objected because Esther was a case with Achashverosh of Shara Veros, and it was Befarhes.
I'll leave this point as a tzarechiyah that I know you don't have that much time, but I think an important question. According to Rabbeinu Tam, you still do have the din of kanoim pogimbo.
In other words, if you're going to say that what?
It's
That
exactly like a
Rabbeinu
bias
Tam.
behema. It's not exactly like bias behema.
It's like Bibis Behema, so why would there be a din of Kanoim Pogimbo? But you know what? I'm not sure. Kanoim Pogimbo is a sugya with Pinchas and Zimri. I don't know exactly whether it applies to Bias Behema or not. Because it could be that Kanoim Pogimbo might even apply to a I don't know. Yeah, I'd have to research that. So if you want, Nassim, send me a note if you want me to research that about Kanoim Pogimbo. That's a big, gigantic sugya. I don't know when it applies, when it doesn't apply. And would that have anything to do with the violation of a Gili Arayos and a Chiv Misa and Yehorg Val Yavar? The very fact that it's only Kanoim Pogimbo means that Bezdin can't get involved. Here we're talking about Bezdin getting involved because Bezdin could paskin that rather than violate Gili Arayos, you have to give up your life. In fact, some Rishonim will say that if you don't give up your life, Bezdin will put you to death. I mean, we don't paskin like that, but that's the shita of the Kesef Mishnah in the name of the Ramath, of Rav Moshe Cohen, that in a case of Yehorg Val Yavar, and you fail to give up your life, you violate Gili Arayos, and you made that decision, you will be put to death for that. I mean, the Rambam disagrees, but that is the shita of some of the Rishonim. So we see that, we have halach of Kanoim Pogimbo, and the question is whether Bias Akum, according to Rabbeinu Tam, I mean, that's the case of Zimri, of Zimri with, what was her name? Cosby, right? So that was Kanoim Pogimbo. Just 1 second. See, I'm not sure if Kanoim Pogimbo works in two directions. Now you got me curious. In the case of Pinchas, he was having a relationship with a non-Jewish woman. That's Kanoim Pogimbo. The other way around, a Jewish woman with a non-Jewish man, I don't know if there's Kanoim Pogimbo.
You could be right. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, okay. I mean, again, we're covering Kolatar Kula Regalachas, but we're gonna try to focus on
I
Rabbeinu
think it
Tam's
might
point.
though. I have to look it up.
Yeah.
Hey, we'll go back here.
But Tiretz Rabbeinu Tam, the Ein Chayovim Misal Bilas Over Kochavim, Mishum Derachmon Afkare Lazare Dove Kochavim Kedamrina Beperk Nosin Al Anusa Dichsiv Pasuk in Yechezkel V'Zirmas Susim Zurmosim. When we talk Kach, now this is one of those rare occasions, but it's not totally rare, where a Rishon like Rabbeinu Tam has a breakthrough in halacha, and then he tells you a halacha l'maisa hora that comes from that breakthrough in halacha. So what's the case? A married woman had a relationship with a guy, and then the guy converted to Judaism, and her husband died. Her husband divorced or whatever it was. Can she have a relationship now and get married to this ger who was the Boel? Now, as a general rule, and that's the Gemara in Sota, we have a special limud v'nitma echel baal echel boel. So she's not allowed to have any relationship with a Boel. So we're talking about a married woman who had a relationship with another person out of wedlock, and now she got a divorce from her husband. She wants to marry that person. It's an Isa Doraisa. Again, what kind of Isa Doraisa is it? I don't know, but it's an Isa Doraisa, either an essay or it's like a lava b'machal, whatever it is. However, now Rabbeinu Tam he's made a breakthrough here, and he said that a guy is considered like a bias behema. And therefore, maybe the principle of echad lebal, echad leboel does not kick in. And lefichach, he says, mitoch kach haya rotza Rabbeinu Tam. I don't know what the word rotza means here in this context. It sounds like it was just a havamina Rabbeinu Tam, but they didn't accept it. Lahatir bas Yisrael, sheimir. Okay, so she was acting like a non-Jewish woman. Let's say she converted to another religion. Ubal le'akum, and she'd have a relationship with an idolater or a non-Jew. V'shuv niskaya. Now he's a ger. This is like the old principle that the man is more religious than the woman. Like, even though she was born Jewish, but she was acting like a goyeta and living with the goyim. But yet he, who had a relationship with her, went ahead and decided he wants to be a ger. Shuv niskayer ima. Now, ima here means that she also underwent gerus. That's a major issue in halacha, whether a Jewish person that undergoes baptism, for example, is required another gerus.
Was she married, this woman? She was single.
She was married, and therefore
that's what I thought also. But the Tosfos doesn't say that. I'm saying that the pshat in Tosfos, yes. It's just he should have written that. The word married isn't written there.
Right, but he's gonna apply the principle of echel boel, so that by definition would only apply if she's married.
Right.
Right. He says the following: He permitted her, or at least he wanted to permit her, to remain married or to get married to this ger. He would be Masada Kiddushin at the wedding to the ger, who is the boel. We will not apply the principle of echel lebal, echel leboel, the bias ovei kochavim. Davi can bias behema. The Hiksha Rav Rabbeinu Yitzchak Rav Mordechai, the Rivam, asks on Rabbeinu Tam. Okay, this you could do with relatives. Like the Alkan bias akum nesr lebal al korchenu. We have no choice, based on the Gemara in Ksubis, to assume that a woman a married woman who had a relationship with a guy, she's not allowed to resume her relationship with her Baal. And the Rivam assumes echad lebal, echad leboel. If there's an Isser on the Baal, then ipso facto there's an Isser on the Boel. Kedamrin and Chasav the Ika Prutos. The Perek ha'isha shenis armala. What was the case there? Gabi ha'isha shenechbisha bidei akum So she was taken into captivity by the Goyim. Al Yidei Nefashos Asur Lebala. In other words, even if there was a situation in which she was nefashos, her life was in danger, nevertheless she's Asur Lebaila. Why is she Asur Lebaila? I mean, this is a case of a god. And according to Rabbeinu Tam, this is not Gili Arayos. So why is it called nefashos? And the Gemara goes on to say that we were afraid of a prutza, that maybe, even though she was raped by these captors, maybe she would have ratzon. Okay, so let's say she has ratzon. And therefore the Gemara says that she's asura lebala, that when she gets freed from captivity, and we're assuming that she had this relationship with the guy, the captor, she cannot resume her marriage with her husband if she's a prutza, because she may have ratzon. Because we're not talking about an Ashes Cohen, who's Asur even ba'onis, we're talking about an Ashes Yisrael. So,
Right.
so the Rivam says, I object to Rabbeinu Tam. You see explicitly that even with Bias Akum, she's Asur Lebal. That's black and white in the Gemara. So how can you tell me it's Bias Behema? And apparently, which is what we want to discuss next week, there's a difference between Echel Lebal and Echel Leboel. What did Esther say to Mordechai when she went in to Achashverosh? Kasher avadati mi beis Abba kach avadati mimcha. It says kasher avadati. I'm avadati mi beis Abba, meaning I lose my status in the family, and avadati mimcha, I can no longer resume my relationship with you. So we see that Echel Lebal applies even through Bias Akum. Alma legabi bailo lo chashivi Bias Akum ki Bias behema. The Gemara says that if a woman is married to a Kohen or wants to marry a Kohen, and she had a sodomy relationship with an animal, she's allowed to marry a Kohen. But if she had a relation with a guy, that's called Eved V'Yakum Shabal Bas Yisrael, Asa Zona. She's a Zona and she can no longer marry a Kohen. But why? If you're telling me, Rabbeinu Tam, that it's only a Bias Behema, well, the din is behemoth that she's still kshera lekahuna. The afal pi shebibias behema ein nifselis the ein znus lebehema can amrim perkabal yivimto. The Rivam is covering a whole sweep of sugyas and shas. The zari the ovekachavim the afgerach mona linyan chayes. Now it's true that when it says zirmas susim zirmasam, Chazal comment that Rachmona after Elizare. But what does it mean after Elizare? After Elizare means midin yichus, that a guy doesn't have yuchsin in this context where he had a relationship with a Jewish woman. The child is not miyuchas to the father who's a non-Jew. But it doesn't mean that his bia is a bias behema. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that he's mufka from yuchsin. Aval bias akum lo after. The Torah was never mafkir, so to speak, the bia of a guy. The bia of a guy is like a bia of Yisrael as far as Arayas is concerned. And therefore, says the Rivam against Rabbeinu Tam, Kevon denesrel abal, asur leboel. We have a double limud, two sides of a coin, which is Haba Italia. It says v'nitma twice. Amrinon, the Sota, the Perga, okay, fine, we'll get to Sota in a minute, but before we get to that, is v'nitma, echad lebal, v'echad leboel. So if an Akum has a relationship with the Bas Yisrael who's married to a Jew, then she can no longer resume her relationship with her husband. That's called Echel Lebal. And therefore, we can plug in the next part of Echel Lebal, the two sides of one coin. And we're stuck with Rabbeinu Tam because Rabbeinu Tam obviously understands that there's a difference between Echel Lebal and Echel Leboel. And it's not a package deal. It's not Haba Italia. These are not two sides of the same coin. And that's what we have to analyze according to Rabbeinu Tam. Why is it Echad Lebal and not Echad Leboel? So Bias Akum would generate an Isra on the Baal in a case of a married woman, but not on the Boel. Now, the Rivam is going to come up with this breakthrough theory as to why the Gemara didn't ask about Esther Gilead rights, because the Rivam can no longer accept the teretz of Rabbeinu Tam that Achashverosh is a guy, and therefore it's not bias Adam, but rather bias behema. According to Rivam, that's not true. And according to Rivam, there's no doubt that bias akum is Gili Arayas. Why didn't the Gemara ask about a relationship between Esther and Achashverosh under the law of Gili Arayas? Why did the Gemara introduce Farhes? And here the Rivam is going to try to explain that we don't know that Esther was actually married to Mordechai. It's very possible that she was not married to Mordechai, and that's going to be a machlokas Amoraim as to how to interpret Vayikra Lo Labas. And the Rivam is going to assume that the Svar of Karka Olam would certainly, and it was partial to the Gemara, be a mitigating circumstance with regard to Gili Arayos. So there are two roads that the Rivam is going to offer, two alternatives. One alternative is to say that Esther was not Gili Arayos, she wasn't married to Mordechai. And the other way is to say that even if she was married to Mordechai, and even if I assume that Bias Akum is Bias Erva and it's Gili Arayos, but nevertheless, we're not sure that in a case of an Ishu's Karka Olam, that the din of Gili Arayos would apply. Okay, then, so this is where we're going to stop for today. And the Mirza Hashem, now on Sunday, we're trying an experiment. I'm not sure if it's going to work. But instead of starting at Psachim Shir, as we usually do at 9:35, we're going to make an attempt to start it earlier at 9. The Daf Yomi will be at 7:30 till 8:30, and then at 9 o'clock on Zoom, all the shiurim on Zoom, we'll start with Psachim. And then at 10 o'clock, we're going to begin a new chapter in Efrat history. And that is a shir by yours truly in a place called Rimon. Rimon is north of here. That's the most northernest part of the city of Efrat. And that we're going to start B'li Neder at 10 o'clock. I hope everything works out.
What's the shir going to be on 10 o'clock?
And that's going to be the third parak of Sukkah. That's called Lulav HaGozel.
Okay, very nice.
Okay, then. So we're going to talk about a stolen Lulav. And that will be there. Then after that, we'll get back to Sanhedrin and Mirza Hashem at 11 o'clock. Now, it hasn't been clarified yet to me whether or not the 10 o'clock shir in, it's called, the shul's called Magid Avram, which is in Rimon, whether that shir is in Hebrew or in English. So I'm not sure about that.
We speak both languages, at least some of us.
So that's what we're going to try in Mirza Hashem, a new experiment. If that experiment doesn't work and people don't show up, because my biggest challenge in Efrat is to get people to show up. That's why I wanted to do some work with you, Natan, in Tel Aviv, if you need me. But anyway,
you're welcome to come here.
Yeah, well,
we're having a Malav Malka, by the way.
If you need an extra, an extra mashpia.
I'm not joking. If you'd like to give a shir, Malav Malka, you're welcome to come.
Yeah, well, you write me the note. It'll be easier if I'm in Netanya. That's a little bit closer. But we'll hope to be in Netanya, if not next week, the week after. So that's going to be an experiment. If that experiment doesn't work out, then we go back to our original 9:35 for our group on Zoom, and then we pick up at 10:45 Masechet Sanhedrin. Okay, then. So let me take this opportunity to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom, and if anyone's interested, in about a half hour from now at 12:15 on Zoom, but it's a face-to-face shir. I give a shir in Ivrit, in Hebrew, presenting Rav Soloveitchik's insights into Parshas Emor in this case. Okay, then?
I might be able to make it.
Okay, if you're there, you're there. You'll be with me in Alon Shvut over Zoom.